without further ado, I think Doc Johnson and Frank have been seen in the back room and should appear shortly.
All right, Frank, get your shirt off and get up on that table so I can finish the examination. Well, folks, if you'll just be patient, I need to finish up with young Frank here, and then I'd be happy to have a chat with you. All right, scooch back a little bit there.
What are you going to do, Doc?
I'm going to test the reflexes in your knees, Frank.
Whoa, that was weird. Are they okay?
Well, I hope so. You should be able to keep them.
You're just funning me. Aren't you, Doc?
I am, Frank. All right, sit up straight.
What is that?
This is my first stethoscope. I use it from time to time to listen to the heart. But I do have a more modern one here. Have you ever heard your own heartbeat, Frank?
No.
Here, put those in your ears. Now listen quietly.
I'm alive!
Good to hear, Frank. Good to hear. All right, turn your head to the right.
What are you going to do now?
I'm going to examine your ears with what is called an otoscope.
Will it hurt?
No, it will not hurt. When I tell you to, I want you to pinch your nose closed and then swallow hard. If I hear a gurgling sound from your ear, that's going to tell me that you have fluid in your inner ear. So, all right, go. Nothing. Where is the bell? Young man, you are as fit as a fiddle.
Thanks, Doc. Oh, and how do you learn so much about medicine?
Well, Kernville is the first town in which I practiced medicine. Prior to that, before coming to California, I completed my medical studies. I studied at the University of Iowa, College of Physicians and Surgeons, New York University, Medical College, and also for a bit of time in Europe.
That's a lot of schooling.
Yes, sir, that is. All right, skedaddle.
Hey, Doc, where's George? I wanted to say bye to him.
Oh, George is in Los Angeles. I'll tell him that you said hi, though.
Okay, Doc.
Hey, hold up, Frank. Do me a favor. If you see that young artist Walker fellow, would you tell him to come find me, please? I need to talk to him. And also, I need to write your folks a note, but I want to talk to these kind of people first.
Okay.
Well, thanks for being so patient, folks. You might wonder who Frank was asking about George. It's actually quite the story. Some years ago, we had a fellow in this valley by the name of George Green. And he was, well, for the lack of a better term, our village drunk. He always seemed to be long on thirst, but short on life expectancy. And me, being a physician who's always trying to increase his medical knowledge, decided to make George a proposition I did not think he could refuse. I agreed to pay George a sum of money in advance if he agreed to leave his body in my care upon his death, whenever that might occur. Well, he readily agreed. Unfortunately, at least for George, his love of spirit soon got the best of him. But as agreed, when he died, his body was turned over to my care. I conducted the autopsy, the results of which were quite predictable, and also a number of anatomical studies. I then asked Frank Bull if he'd be so kind as to deliver the remains down to the slaughterhouse. And there the bones were boiled out, cleaned and polished, reassembled, and now George stands in my office, wherever that office might be. It's been somewhat of a ritual for people when they arrive and depart my office to greet George. And he was a rather amiable man when he wasn't drunk. And so I'm sure he appreciates the attention. Well, anyway, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Dr. James Hunter Johnson. I was born in Indiana in the year 1850. And as I've said, after completing my medical training, I first came to Kernville to hang up my shingle and practice medicine. That was back in 1880. I've been married, had a wonderful wife. Her name was Christiana Engel. We were married in Illinois prior to coming to California. Unfortunately, she passed not long ago at the young age of 42. She did, however, bear me two sons, Benjamin and Ray. I currently live and work in Los Angeles, which would then beg the question, why am I here in Kernville today? Well, ever since coming to the Kern Valley, I have just fallen in love with this beautiful place that you live and the people that live here. It holds a dear spot in my heart. And folks know that if they have a serious medical issue, they can contact me, and I'd be happy to come and lend whatever assistance I can. And not long ago, Mrs. Walker sent a telegram stating that her 7-year-old son, Artis, had been spending a considerable amount of time in the Kern River, having just learned to swim. And he had developed a severe, dull ache in the back of his neck, and she feared that it might be spinal meningitis. Well, it's a long, hard 2-day ride from my home in Los Angeles. But when I arrived, I was pleased to find that the lad's symptoms were not consistent with spinal meningitis. So I prescribed him the milk diet, plenty of rest, and told him to stay out of that darn river. I currently live and work in Los Angeles, as I said. But practicing medicine in Los Angeles nowadays in the first decade of the 20th century is quite a bit different than doctoring here in the valley when I first arrived back in 1880. There were few, if any, doctors at the time. Folks pretty much just had to care for themselves. Folks out of the South Fork now, they didn't have a doctor, but they did have, in fact, they still do have the next best thing. And that's the person in Sophia Mariah Smith. Sophia, of course, is the wife of Thomas Hooper Smith. And when the Smiths first arrived back in 1862, she was the first white woman on the South Fork. And over the years, she's cared for many of the folks out in that neck of the woods. She, of course, will also attend to women during their confinement and has delivered many babies over the years. If a doctor's truly needed, then they'll send a cowboy on a fast horse up to Caliente, that being the location of the nearest telegraph, and now telephone. And they'll contact a doctor in Bakersfield. And the doc will hop the first eastbound train he can find and get off in Caliente. The Southern Pacific actually provides that service for free. And once in Caliente, the doc will be met by a relay of buggies with drivers and fast horses to race him down to the patient. Charles Bennett, that's the son of Father Jesse Lee Bennett, the Methodist minister, owns a livery there up in Caliente, and he'll provide the first rig with driver and horses to race the doctor down to Walker Basin. There, Walter Rankin Sr. will be waiting with his rig to race the doctor down through Havilah to the Hot Springs Valley, where John Neal will be waiting at Hot Springs House with another rig to race the doctor out to the South Fork to Charles Rankin's ranch, and then from there to the patient. Of course, we do not have, and we have never had, a hospital in the Kern River Valley, which means that many times that doctor will just arrive too late. Being a rural doctor such as myself prior to the turn of the century required long hours, often with broken sleep, as you attended to patients scattered all over this large valley, both day and night. At times I might have to sleep in my buggy if folks didn't have a bed for me late at night, or money. Collections can be a problem. Folks will pay for my services if and when they can, but it can be infrequent. But I must admit that collections have never been my strong suit, and probably never will be. But that doesn't mean that I haven't been richly rewarded for my time here in the valley. The Kern Mountains and the Kern River and its mountains have given me some grand pleasures over the years. I'm an avid fisherman, and I've spent many a day sauntering throughout the entire southern Sierras with my fly rod and my camera. It's truly God's country. Not long ago, I was asked to make a presentation to the Southern California Academy of Sciences in Los Angeles. My program was entitled The High Sierra, Tehachapi to Mount Lyell, in which I presented 100 lantern slides that I had taken over the years. It was very well received. Well, I think that's enough about me. Before I send you on your way, though, I'd like to tell you of a tragedy that occurred here recently. We had some heavy rains, and the Kern River rose quickly, topping its banks and flowing out into the cottonwoods. And some young folks, Frank there included, decided to go down one night and watch those rushing waters. Frank, how many kids were there, and where'd you go?
There were 6 of us. We went down to the bridge at the end of Nellie Dent Street.
Yeah, that bridge is just a simple suspension bridge. It has 2 boards, each about a foot wide, held up by cables. Normally it stands, 6, 8, 10 feet above the surface of the river. That night the water was dashing at the undersides of those boards. And as those youths were on that bridge with their lantern in the moonlight, excitedly watching that river go by, a large cottonwood loomed out of the darkness and rammed into that bridge, knocking them all into the water. Well, luckily they all got themselves out into shore, all but one. Maggie's showmate, she could not be found.
We searched for her all night, Doc.
I know you did, Frank. Most of the men in town did. But it wasn't until the next morning that Charlie Tibbetts finally spotted Maggie's body downriver a ways on a small sandbar in the middle of the river, and she was still clutching a cottonwood branch. Well, I tell you this, folks, because Mrs. Showmate still has other daughters at home, and she's truly in need of some assistance. And if you might be so kind before you leave to leave a little bit for her, I'm sure she would greatly appreciate that. Frank will be happy to take it from you when you leave. Frank, you got yourself a sack there or something?
Found a clean bedpan, Doc.
Good job, Frank. Well, I appreciate y'all stopping to listen to this old country doctor. I may live in Los Angeles, but my heart is still here in the Kernville Valley. Y'all have a good day now. Give Frank a round of applause, folks. All right, I need to change glasses so I can actually see something. Those do me no good. Is that going to come on? Is that coming on? You see?
There you go.
It takes a bit. All right. All right. Well, let me start by introducing ourselves. Linda asked if we would do that, so I will introduce us. And I'm going to start with the good-looking one. That's this guy back here. And of course, Frank Boston is. Is that good? Okay. You're expecting my eyes are really good to see this in the dark. But they're okay, I think. Frank Boston, of course, is our own junior docent, Deegan Powers. And Deegan's 13 years old. He lives in Bodfish with his parents, Brian and Danielle Powers. His sister is Cora. How old's Cora?
Small. She's 10.
10 years old. And Deegan is in 8th grade. He's homeschooled by his parents. And as I said, he's also one of our junior docents. He is an 8th generation Powers. His a bunch of greats in there. Our grandfather was Thomas Cooper Smith. And so, but he's the 8th generation that lives in the Kern River Valley. And among others, he loves gaming and so forth. And then he's also a Boy Scout in scouting. He has the rank of silver, and which means he's only 2 steps away from being an Eagle Scout. So within the next year or 2, we expect our junior docent to also be an Eagle Scout. So very good. So I really appreciate him playing along with me here. As far as the ugly one goes, that would be me. To tell you about myself, I figured out the other day that a half a century ago, I graduated from the University of California, Davis, with education degrees. I've taught school in Clovis and Wallace as a classroom teacher. I worked as a naturalist for the Fresno County school system for a while. I was assistant headmaster at a private boys' school for a while. And then was a site administrator for a place for Stanislaus County, like we have Camp Keith. They had Foothill Horizons, and I was the principal on-site administrator there for a while. In 1990, I started a company called America Lives, where you can see there I'm a Revolutionary War soldier here, and over here I was a colonial tin peddler. And Then in 1995, I made the best decision I ever made in my life, and I asked my wonderful wife Terry to marry me, and she said yes. And so she joined the show, and she was a very subservient colonial 17th century wife. We had a lot of fun with that. And then when we retired from that, Larry Holocaust and myself and Rich Zimmerman up here started Curmudgeon Studios, and for 15 years or 14 years we ran an art gallery here in town and did oil paintings and photography. And then I got talked into joining the board of the Kernville Valley Historical Society, and it's gone downhill from there. I do need to tell you though that my wife Terry, besides helping here, she of course works here at the annex. She's also the one that you're going to see all the genealogical and a lot of the stuff we got off the internet. She did all that. She's really good at finding all that stuff. I didn't do it. So anyway, for the Historical Society though, Larry Holocaust and I started writing books, and the first book we wrote a number of years ago was The Golden Trout Wilderness. It's for sale here. It was explaining how that was done, and then 2 years ago, maybe now, 3 years, I don't know. Then we wrote The Building of Isabella Dam, and then our third book, as Linda talked about, will be coming out on February 8th. In fact, my wife isn't here today because UPS is delivering hundreds of books to me today. Faith, Family, and Forestry, the story of Bob Powers, accidental historian. So if you're interested in that book, it's available for pre-order until January 31st. There's some applications up here if you want it. If you pre-order the book, you will not only get the book, but you will get a book with a numbered book plate in it, and it'll be a numbered edition of the book. After the 31st, if you buy it, it's just the book. So if you're interested in that, and then on February 8th, Larry will be up here, and we'll be having a book signing in the Jenkins Pack Station. And in addition to that, Larry will also be the Artist of the Month for February. And what he has done is going to be interesting, a little different than we've ever done before. I don't know how many oil paintings he's doing, 6 or 7 or 8, I don't know how many. But he'll have those displayed in the art room for sale, like normal. But each artwork will also have a silent auction sheet. So if you see something and you don't want to pay full price for it, you can put down a silent auction price, and they will all sell for whatever that's silent. There'll be a minimum, I think, $10 or something. But basically, there'll be a silent auction for all of those. So hopefully they will all sell, and 100% of the sale goes to the museum. He's not taking anything. So that'll be a whole month of February. So that'll actually be up before the 8th, I imagine. Okay, well let's talk about this program. We have a number of sources that I use to get this information. The kernel of information came from Artist Walker's book, The Rough and the Righteous. It's for sale in the museum also. That's where I learned about Doc Johnson, and then we took it from there and did some more research and so forth. If you read Doc Johnson's book, Artist, a little about him, it's kind of interesting, but I like to say that he might have been our first soap opera character. And you'll see why in a second. Interesting fellow. Another book that I used was called The Frontier Doctor by Yerling Coe. And this guy was a doctor in 1880, the same time Doc Johnson was, but he was in Bend, Oregon. And he wrote this big, long book about all of his experiences. And so that gave me a lot of information about what it was like to be a doctor in the 1880s on horseback, in buggies, trying to serve people in the greater Bend area. And so, some of the things I talked about, collections and sleeping in the buggy, that all came from this book. And that's also on the back here. If you're interested, you come take a look at it. We have it in our collection. Of course, you can't do anything around here without looking at Bob Powers' books. And so I use his books for background and looking for other doctors that are in the valley and so forth. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The other book that was used was Beneath the Lake. That's where the story of Maggie Shilbate comes from, and it's much more detailed in the book, Beneath the Lake, than what I said in my little spiel here. So if you're interested, that's where you can find all of that. And then one other book that we have in our annex here that was kind of interesting is Doctors of the Old West. It's kind of a pictorial thing with lots of information. So if you're interested in doctoring and so forth, that's another good book that we have. So With that having been said, let's tell you the rest of the story. To start with, let's see what he looked like. We only have one picture of him that I know of. Here he is. If you saw my performance for Tales on the Trail, I had a fairly substantial mustache that took me 4 months to grow. I was not going to keep that for this, I'm sorry. You guys aren't worth it. But anyway, that's what Doc Johnson looked like. We have this in our photo archive here. The caption for the photo that we have says that this was taken in 1870 in Yellowstone. I don't think that's true. It's in 1870. He would have been about 20 years old. That's not a 20-year-old man. And so when that was taken, I don't know, but that's what they tell us that he looked like. And I haven't found any other pictures. Let's get some basic information about the doc. You can see that he was born in Indiana in October 3rd of 1850. And by the time he was 20 years old, he was living in Illinois, in Schuyler County, Illinois. And that's where his mother died, and it's also where he met and married Christina Engel. The 1870 census shows that Doc Johnson is now living in Illinois with his parents. They moved to Illinois, and he had 6 siblings. I don't know if you can see that very well, but that's, I don't know if we can get that any better focused or not. But, I don't have a lot of information on Christina Engel. We know that she was living in Schuyler County with her parents. She was 12 years old at the time in 1870, during the 1870 census, and that makes her 17 years old when she married a 25-year-old Doc Johnson in Schuyler County. Hello. And then we have her living with her husband in 1880 in Kern County in Kernville in 1880. You'll note that she died prior to, all we know is that she died prior to 1900. We don't have the exact date of her death or where she's buried, or I just couldn't find anything. Interestingly enough, Doc Johnson actually married a second time, very late in life. He married a woman by the name of Dorothy Conley, and I only found 2 references about this. One was just a 1 sentence in a news article. That led me to the Los Angeles Evening Press in December, and it talks about his marriage to her there. The 1920 census, however, finds Doc single again. So he was only married for maybe 3 years at most. And he was living in part of Pasadena and Santa Anita at the time in the 1920 census. Also over here, I don't know if you can see it, but his, his occupation is listed as none by 1920. So he's getting to be an old man by that point. We don't know a lot about Dorothy. She in the what's happening here? I'm going the wrong way. Where are we? There we go. The 1920 census for Pasadena has Dorothy living with her sister, and she's single, and she's a sales lady in a, what do they call it, a style shop. So it was a very short period for that marriage. The doc is died. Why is that doing that? Anyway, that's his headstone. He's buried in San Gabriel, California. He died in 1922. Well, let's talk about his education, because what I said and what actually happened is a little different. Just because of time factors for Tales on the Trail, you have to sort of change things around. This is a copy of the Directory of Deceased American Physicians from 1904 to 1929, and I don't know what's happening with this computer, because all that double stuff isn't doubled in anything else I have, so I don't know why it's doing that. Anyway, we can see that he graduated from the University of Iowa. He graduated in 1878, and he was in Kernville by 1880. And he came west with his family. Her first son was born back in Illinois. He came west after his education. This is the 1880 census, and we can find that Doc Johnson is listed there with his family. And I don't know if you can see it, but Jesse Bennett was the actual enumerator there. So we know he was here in 1880. The 1880 Great Register for Kern County also lists him as a voter living and voting in Kernville in 1880. For sure, then we know that he was here. There's also a document called the California Official Register of Physicians, and you can see that over here he's listed as a doctor in Kernville in 1885. So we know he was here from 1880 to 1885. You can also notice that he's the only doctor listed for Kernville, and then a couple of them in Bakersfield. But if we go back to that deceased American physicians, looking down, oh, I keep pushing the wrong button. Right here, we can see that he went to New York University in 1887 and completed some studies there. So he did not do all of his studies before coming to Kernville. He did the University of Iowa, came here and practiced, and then sometime before 1887, 1885 we know he was here, so somewhere in there he went back and did some more studies at the University, New York University College of Medicine. And then we also have on the right there, we have a application for a passport in 1887. And Artis Walker says in The Rough and the Righteous that he did a little studies in Europe. So I'm guessing that that's what we're talking about here. I couldn't find any immigration papers for steamship records and all that type of stuff that's available. I couldn't find him on any passenger list of when or exactly where he went, so we don't know. But at least according to Artis, he did study in Europe, and this makes sense that he had to get a passport to get out of the country. We do know that he was back in California, though, by 1888. Okay, we have an ad in the LA Times December 9th, and he's got an ad there in the LA Times, so we know that he was there. There's a story in 1906 in the Los Angeles Times about a fraudulent check that was written on his account, that somebody got ahead of the check and wrote a fake check and tried to cash it. So we know he was in LA in 1906. And up on the right, through Ancestry, it says he was living in LA in 1913. He was also in Springville, and he was also in San Gabriel. So he kind of moved around a little bit. And then down on the bottom, in the Bakersfield, California, he was listed as a visitor in 1915. We're going to talk a little more about his time here in the Valley in a moment. We also know the man was a Mason because he was listed as the medical examiner for the new Masonic Hall that opened up in Calico, and that was in 1886. So he was a Mason, Tom. It's interesting that, in 1886 we know he was here in 1885. Was he in LA in 1886, and that's why he was involved in Calico? That's a long way away, so I don't know how all that works, but the man did get around. I also found an interesting article, an 1897 article in the San Francisco newspaper called The Call and the Post, and it talks a little bit about what it means to be a doctor in Kernville. The article says, a Kernville correspondent, in calling attention to the climatic advantages of his section, declares that did the livelihood of our doctors depend upon their practice, they would surely starve. Is it possible that at Kernville doctors have to go out and saw wood or bale hay for a living? So it was kind of tough to make a living sometimes. And as I said earlier, the information about trying to collect from people and so forth, I'm sure that was the same case here, but I got that from the guy up in Oregon. Using Bob's books and some other information, we do have a number of doctors that were in and around the Kern River Valley. Of course, Sophia Mariah Smith was there. And then we have other doctors in Havilah and so forth. And we don't know if they actually practiced medicine. We know they were doctors. They might have been here for gold mining or for whatever purpose. We really just don't know. I'll talk more about this guy right here in a second, Dr. Van de Horries, and a little bit about Dr. Witzik for a second. Probably the most famous doctor, if you want to talk about a famous doctor in the valley, he'd be a good character for Tales on the Trail of somebody's interested, would be Doc Smith. Doc Smith came in 1915 and was here for 32 years. And helped deliver a lot of famous babies, Bob Powers being one of them, and so forth. So there's a lot of information in Bob's books about that. As far as doctoring goes, there was an article in the Bakersfield, California in 1909 about a shooting out in Kelso. And the article says that the doctor had to attend to that, and it took him he wasn't there until he was there, rode all night and got there in the morning. What we don't know is, did he come from Kernville or did he come from Bakersfield? Yeah. And so we don't know where he came from, but we know that you had to travel. There weren't that many doctors, so you had to sort of travel around. Dr. Van der Horries, in 1899 over here, says he was a doctor in Kernville, but that's about all that we know about him. Dr. Whitsitt, there was an article about him, and he said he died in Kernville. Turned out he lived in Kern City, or Kern City, but he died in Kernville. It's not the same Whitsitt as Camp Whitsitt for the Boy Scouts. Completely different person. But Dr. Whitsitt, hello, come on. There we go. I don't know why it's doing that.
Font size.
What's that?
It's the font size.
What I have it here printed and it's perfect, so I don't know why it's doing that. Don't know. Yeah, I mean, it looked fine at home tonight. It's morning at 4:30 when I was looking at it. Dr. Whitsitt was listed in 1900 census living in Kern City, but not in Kernville itself. So let's talk about his sons. We didn't talk about his son. Doc Johnson didn't tell you about his son. He had two sons. His first son was Benjamin. He was born in 1877 in Illinois, and then came west with him when they came to Kernville. He was about 3 years old. We don't know a lot about him, but there is some information we find. We know that he enlisted in the Navy we have a U.S. Army Register of Enlistments, and he registered in 1902 in the Navy as just a foot soldier. We know kind of what he looked like. He had blue eyes, brown hair, fair complexion. He was 5'6", but he didn't last long. He was given a discharge, medical discharge, honorable medical discharge, but we don't know why. We do know that his Benjamin, though, however, married. In the 1920 census, we know that by then he married in 1906, and by 1920 he had 3 children. They were living in LA, had moved to LA, probably to be near Doc Johnson, who was down in Pasadena at the time, because Doc was getting pretty old. And he died in 1942 and is buried in San Gabriel Cemetery, same place his dad is. I don't know if the graves are right next together, but it's the same cemetery. His other son, Ray, we know a little bit more about. We know when he was born. We know that he was born after they came to Kernville, so he was born in the Kern River Valley. And he stayed around. He married a local girl by the name of Anna Robinson in 1897. Couldn't find a lot of information about her, though. And they had one son, and he was also named Ray. So we have Ray Sr. and Ray Jr. Discussing Ray, however, is going to begin our soap opera for the day. This was interesting. So, let's begin with episode number 1, The Life and Times of Doc Johnson, episode 1, The Case of the Troubled Son. The Bakersfield Morning Echo on September 8th of 1908 stated, Ray J. Johnson of Kernville, the son of Dr. J.H. Johnson, now of Los Angeles, but formerly of Kernville, killed himself in a saloon in San Francisco Sunday night by swallowing cyanide of potassium. On his body were found letters to his wife in Kernville, to a Miss Julia Panza of Santa Barbara, and one addressed to whom it may concern. The letter that he wrote, it was in the Morning Echo. He wrote to his wife, stated, My dear wife and baby, I have tried to, but have failed. Don't let Dr. Johnson touch my body. Live a good life, both of you, and be careful that you marry a man that can give you a good home. My last wish is that you will lead a good Christian life. Ray, that's his son, you don't want to follow in my footsteps. I am your husband and father. So that's the letter that he wrote to his wife. He also wrote a little note to Julia Panza of Santa Barbara, and he wrote, Dear Julia, mum's the word. Forget all about me. What's the use? Life is not worth living. Goodbye. May your life be happier than mine has been. RJJ. Then he wrote a to whom it may concern letter. This was in the San Francisco Examiner on September 9th of 1908. To whom it may concern, my name is Ray James Johnson. Do not let my blank father touch me. It is my wish to be buried in Potter's Field, and I have no blank and have no blank quack like Dr. Johnson of Los Angeles touch or in any way have anything to do with me. If he so desires, he may pay my wife the $500 which she honestly owes me. Oh. Little problem there. So now let's get Doc Johnson's side of the story. This was in the San Francisco Call and Post on September 9th of 1908. Notice this is all San Francisco papers. That's where the guy killed himself. And Doc Johnson in the paper is quoted as saying, When I heard of the death of my son, I was not surprised. He had twice before attempted to take his life. Once I journeyed to the Orient after he has tried to kill himself and brought him back to Los Angeles, and for a time he appeared to be satisfied to do right. He went to work at the ironworks. When he was married, his whole life changed. I believe that his wife expected me to keep them both. It was a case of hold up from the first. Ray wrote me many letters asking for money and once tried to borrow $100 from me. I could not keep him and told him it was necessary for him to earn his own living. He was 24 years old and should have been able to make way for himself. That woman seems to have made him believe that I owed him $500 and he sent me letters asking for that amount. I did not owe it to him. When he left here, we agreed to wipe money matters off the slate, and for a time he kept his promise. Once he showed me a letter from his wife, and she told him they would better separate. He married the girl secretly. They had been married only a short time when he asked me for money. About 6 weeks ago, she wrote him a letter telling him that it was off. And she said that I did not approve of his marriage. This, I believe, made him desperate, and he determined to take his life. My boy was literally forced by his wife to commit. When Ray was a lad of 12, he ran away and later joined the Navy. He has led a wild life, and in spite of everything I could do, he refused to be influenced by home ties. His mother is dead, and I have only one child left, Ray's brother. Now there's another person in this story. She wrote a little letter too. Julia Panza. We need to know from her what was going on. So she, and the paper quotes her in 1908 in the September 7th in the Examiner. According to the story told by Miss Panza, she met Johnson 10 weeks ago at Potter Hotel in Santa Barbara, and since that time he showered her with constant attention on her until he made the final proposal of marriage to her last Friday when they were at the beach. He was reminded that he already had a wife. And then he had no right to propose to another woman. But his reply to this was, he stated that his wife was suing for divorce, and when she'd obtained it, Johnson said he would be ready to marry Miss Panza and make her happy. We've heard that before. When Miss Panza explained to Johnson that under no conditions would she promise to marry him, that she was already engaged to another, Johnson said there was nothing left for him in life. Enter another person in this little fiasco. And this is a Mrs. Lou Sutcliffe, I guess it's pronounced, and she was quoted in the same paper, the Call and Post, in September of 1908. It says, "This poor boy has suffered so much." This is Ray's aunt. So this is who's writing this. "This poor boy suffered so much and must be the wife, the aunt on the mother's side, you will see, on the wife's side, you'll see it very quickly. This poor boy has suffered so much, and his little family is still suffering because Dr. Johnson would not give him the money that he owed Ray. He had worked hard for that money that he gave to his father, and there was an understanding that it should be invested. A few days ago, when despondency got the best of him, Ray wrote to his father, made an urgent request that he be given some money. Doc Johnson refused, and this caused the poor boy to kill himself." So, that's the end of episode 1. Episode 2, however, there we go. Episode 2 is the case of the spurned lover. Doc Johnson's wife, Christiana, she died in 1900. In 1901, a year later, he meets a Miss Nellie C. May, last name is May, in Los Angeles. He's 15 years her senior, so he's 15 years older. She's a music teacher. 15 years later, 15 years after they've met, she files suit in court for $10,000 for a breach of promise to marry. It took her 15 years to decide to do this. And during the trial, there's trial transcripts, and during the trial, Nellie, who is suing, states the following. "In 1901, he asked me to marry him, and I said I would. A year later, he came to live with my mother and I at our home at 814 West 7th Street. And there are corroborating evidences, yes, he did actually go live with this woman and her mother. We discussed marriage frequently during that time. On October 23rd, 1911, Doc Johnson left for a trip around the world. And it's not the trip that he went to the Orient to get Ray. That was earlier. He said we would be married when he returned. There was a sort of understanding that I was to meet him at the Grand Canyon, but that meeting did not take place." And in the trial transcript, they put some letters that were introduced into evidence. One of them was from December 9th, 1911. It's Doc Johnson writing a letter to Nellie, and the letter closes with most love for both, meaning him, her, and her mother, and he signed it XXX. In 1914, he wrote a letter and said, "I enclose a leaf of kidney fern, so you will have something to remember me by when I'm on the other side of the earth, to show that I still think of you when I look at the Southern Cross instead of the Northern Star. Love to you both, XXX." And then during the trial, Doc Johnson had to testify, and he was asked why he would kiss Miss May if he didn't intend to marry her. And his reply was, "Didn't you ever kiss a girl you didn't intend to marry?" And then Nellie admitted in court, this is great, she said, and I quote, it says, "She herself sucked occasional osculations on Dr. Johnson's brow while he slumbered." The judge ruled in Doc Johnson's favor. He didn't have to pay her $10,000. So, let's go to episode 3. This is the case of the missing doctor. Visalia Times-Delta newspaper, October 4th, 1899. In the early part of August, Dr. Johnson and Miss A.L. Martin, now was his sister-in-law, who was living with him and keeping house after his wife died. So it was sort of a relative. So Doc Johnson, Miss Martin, Ray Johnson, his son, and a W.J. Farmell, a farmer and acquaintance of Doc Johnson living in Kernville, started into the mountains for a camping trip to last a fortnight. They established themselves in the grove of big trees in Sequoia National Park near Sanger. 7 weeks ago, the son of Dr. Johnson returned to Los Angeles, and a week later, Farmell was reported having come out at Porterville. he reported leaving Dr. Johnson and Mrs. Martin in camp in the grove, but since that time, all trace of them has been lost. According to his plans, Doc Johnson was to have returned before the 1st of September, and he obviously had not. His son Ray was quoted as saying that he left the group because he was tired of the woods, but when he left, all was good, and he had not seen or heard directly from his father or his aunt since then. And it was reported that Doc Johnson was seen in Kernville the following week buying supplies, but he left to go back into the forest. Dr. Wes Hughes was quoted as saying that he believed Doc Johnson and Mrs. Martin were either ill or dead somewhere in the forest. He also requested a search party to be formed. It was interesting in researching this because this was big news. And it wasn't just, in those days, somebody printed something in the paper, the other paper would copy it and put it in their paper. But it was all over San Francisco and LA that this Doc Johnson was missing. So the Los Angeles Herald on October 7th of 1899 said, a letter was received by Dr. Hughes from Dr. Johnson yesterday, and it gives an entirely different version of his experience. So Doc Johnson is finally out of the woods, and he's going to explain why everybody shouldn't have been panicking. It says, it now appears that the form of stories that have come out from excited friends who must have been just indulged in a little bit of speculation. Doctor writes that the delay in his return was due to sickness of Mrs. Martin and not himself. At an altitude of 11,000 feet, they were caught in a storm, and the exposure gave Mrs. Martin pleurisy, making it impossible for them to travel. He has sent the animals to a different locality for water and pasture, and he had to walk from the Kings River country through to Kernville. Mrs. Martin also being obliged to walk for several days as the supply of horses gave out. Keep in mind, Doc Martin was a mountain man. He had been spending his whole life up there fishing, and he traipsed all the way from here all the way up to Mount Whitney, and so he knew how to survive himself. But the stories before he did this were great because they were sure this man was lost off the face of the earth. All right, episode 4. That's just a photographer extraordinaire. The LA Times, February 3rd, 1901. A large number of members and friends of the Southern California Academy of Sciences gathered at Elder Hall last evening to witness the exposition of a magnificent set of pictures taken in the High Sierras by Dr. Johnson, who delivered an address upon the High Sierras between Tehachapi and Mount Lyell. They say over 100 lantern slides were shown, each picture as it was flashed upon the canvas, drawing exclamations of interest and admiration. The speaker took his hearers from Caliente north to Kernville, following the mountain crest as far as Mount Whitney, then down to Owens River Valley and following north to Mammoth. He explored the middle fork of the San Joaquin, passing across the divide to Lyell, Mount Lyell, from Owens River Valley, west to the Kings River Canyon, and across Kearsarge Pass. This guy was all over these Southern Sierras. Doc Johnson is a scientist, a mountaineer, a hunter, a camera enthusiast. He spends summer vacations among the Sierras and has many a thrilling adventure in cliff scaling, bear hunting, and being hunted. He has spent 6 seasons in high altitudes and secured specimens and pictures that are valuable in the extreme. And then Doc Johnson, in June of 1907, in the Los Angeles Herald, was quoted as saying, "I have hoofed it all over the Owens River country, and I know there is plenty of water there, and it is good water." Telling the people in LA that they're going to get it someday. And this is just I'll put a picture up here. This is sort of the contraption that showed it's called a lantern slide. All right, so that's Doc Johnson. Let's talk about a couple other people here. One was good old George Green. That whole story about the skeleton, that's all in Rough and the Righteous. Not sure, I couldn't find much. I did found an 1880 census for Havilah where there's a Green, and said he's a miner. Whether that's our George Green, I don't know. But that's the only information I could find about George. As far as the death of Maggie Showmate, there's the bridge that was washed out, or not, the bridge wasn't washed out, but the kids were washed off that bridge, which you can see on a normal, like today, it would be quite far above the river. The drowning took place on January 23rd of 1890. We don't know what happened to Mr. Showmate. If we look at the 1880 census, the Showmates are listed there. It's a Mr. T. Showmate. He's a blacksmith in town. And he's on the 1880 census. Unfortunately, the 1890 census doesn't exist. There was a fire at the Commerce Building in Washington and burned all the 1890 censuses. And so you have a 20-year gap in there where you can do some stuff. The fire was in January of 1921, so they lost the 1890 census, unfortunately. By 1900, however, we have the census in Kernville, and we have one of the Showmate girls being married to Charles Rankin out on the South Fork.
Right.
So she married her, and then her sister Annie is living with him. Well, Annie would not have been born for the 1880 census, and so we don't have any record of her other than she's in this census here. We don't know what happened to Mr. Showmate. He was there originally, and then in the next census he doesn't exist anymore. So we don't know if he died, if he divorced, or whatever, but by the time Maggie was killed, Mom was on her own with the kids. Doc Johnson said that people had to care for themselves in this valley when you didn't have a doctor. And so it's kind of interesting. We have whole bunches of ledgers from the A. Brown store in Kernville and Weldon. This one is from 1893, I believe. And if you go through these, you can see what he was selling in his stores. For example, if you need to care for yourself, I found castor oil, just in a brief, Epsom salts, Vaseline types of things. But he was also selling things like swamp root kidney medicine, carbonic style, wizard oil. These are all patent medicines, typical types of things, 90% alcohol mostly. But things that you could buy at the store, they're all listed, things that people bought in 1893 at A. Brown store. There's lily cream for chaps. Not quite sure what that means. Carter liver pills, I think they still sell Carter's pills. As a kid, I remember those being advertised all the time. So, that brings me to my next history talk on March 22nd. We're going to do something completely different than we've ever done before. We're going to have two sessions, either at 10 or at 1. You're going to have to require, but it's not going to be a lecture at all. We're going to have tables set up and chairs, and we're going to give the people that come ledgers. We have tons of these. We're going to give you a little instruction about what you're looking at, and then we're going to give you some white gloves probably, and we're going to let you look at these things. They're fascinating. I used these Marge Powers when I was doing my history business, America Lives. She gave me a lot of these ledgers, and I let the fifth graders go through these. That was part of the show that we did. And it's fascinating what you find in these things, the types of things. And there's ledgers, there's store books, there's all sorts of different types of books out there. So if you're interested, you can come sign up. It'll be in the gift shop. Will be a sign-up sheet. And we're signing up because we're only going to have so many spaces for you to sit and so forth. So if you're interested, these are absolutely fascinating to look at. And so we're going to be doing that. It's a hands-on type of activity. And so if you're interested, please come on the second. You should learn a lot. It should be very entertaining. Just to give you one clue, they sell tuxes. Tux, T-U-X, tuxes. They were going, why would they sell a tux? They were selling tuxedo tobacco. So they're fascinating, and there's one. There's so many there. I don't know if I can even find the one I'm referring to. But there was one. It was a Weldon store, and it was a certain date. And at the top, just the top of the page, not just somebody, whoever was writing it, wrote Charlie. Forget the last guy's name now. Charlie Jones killed at Dead Man's Gully. And he'd been coming down out of Havilah, and on the old road there was a curve, and they called it Dead Man's Gully, and they just wrote that he was killed that day. And so there's just fascinating stuff to read. Okay, so that's all, folks.